Welcome to Final Fantasy Weekly. I'm Drew Kreisman.
And I am Ira Kreisman.
And let's talk about memory.
Yeah, memory is interesting, or terrifying, or maybe tragic, or unreliable, but also kind of wonderful and amazing. So, I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist. I've never really studied memory in an in-depth kind of way. But in general, my experience with memory is that mine is decent. There are things that really stick out in my mind. I'm fairly certain that I'm remembering things correctly, though I've certainly read plenty of evidence to suggest that, for example, eyewitness testimony is a terrible thing on which to base evidence for a trial, yeah. So I'm mostly pretty happy with my recall and my ability to remember the important things in my life, and anything that I perhaps don't recall, I'm not too worried about it. Though sometimes, for example, when talking to Mom's got an excellent memory for our vacations. I assume you've experienced this, right? Do you remember the theater we went to in LA? And I'm like, yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Or do you remember, when you all went to Alcatraz? And I do remember that one, right? But I don't necessarily remember all the details that she remembers. So I think Mom's memory is probably better than mine.
Right.
And so, I think memory is fascinating. I do worry sometimes, though, that maybe I have forgotten important things, like important events in my life. But because I can't remember them, maybe that's okay, because, it's not...
It's kind of a catch-22.
Right,
I think, and we'll obviously get more into this, for those of you who know where we're going with this, it's the misremembering things that is, I think, more troubling to me, more worrying to me than forgetting things. Because we all forget things, and then there's something will spark your mind and you'll remember, and I still know all the words to Getting Jiggy With It. What? I haven't heard that song in 15 years, but all those words are still in there. Stuff like that.
Right.
But it is that, I think, that anxiety when you've remembered something one way and somebody else has remembered it another way. Maybe that's why it's good that Mom remembers those trips so well, and we can just be like, yeah, I'm pretty sure you're right about that. It's like, I remember being there, all the events around it. Yeah, she's got that stuff locked down. I've got a really good memory for certain things. I've always had really good recall about certain things that I've kind of dedicated. If I take the time to dedicate something to my memory, I tend to have pretty good recall on it. On the flip side of that, anything that I was maybe half paying attention to or 75% paying attention to at the time, I won't remember the next day.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And then there's, real psychology, and I've read interesting philosophy too on, why we forget things when you walk into the next room and you go, why did I come in here?
Why am I in this room? You got to go back to the previous room, right, to spark the thing.
You still have that feeling in your body. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I definitely came here for a reason.
Right. So I got to go back to the living room to remember that, I need to switch the laundry or whatever.
And a lot of that, apparently, according to some, has to do with the space that you're in and, the way that your body and mind interact with the real world. And that's why this is such a fascinating topic and something that's so interesting to get into when fiction gets into it in an interesting way. There's a lot of fiction, movies, television, video games, books, whatever, where, we have flashbacks where we're told about the history, but it's just kind of told. And this gets much, much deeper, does Final Fantasy VII, into memory. And as you talked about, the faulty nature of it, the imperfect elements of memory.
So, Drew, I would like to, as we sometimes do, ask a couple big questions at the beginning of this episode, and then maybe again at the end, and see if we can sort of bookend our thoughts here. But first, I want to share a shared memory. When you and I were pretty young and our cousin Charity came to visit, we would often do these talent shows. Do you remember doing those?
Okay, so do I remember doing them? No, I was too young for that. I do remember watching video of them later.
And there's a particular incident.
Yeah.
Dad made for me a wooden prop of a guitar, essentially, because I was going to do some music videos with some friends, and that never happened. But when Charity came over, we used that as a prop for Welcome to the Jungle. And I'm out there jamming out. I'm like 7 or 8 years old, which would have made you, 3?
Yeah.
And I'm jamming out, and you come out on stage with me and start dancing around, and I don't even notice, and I smash you in the head with the neck of that guitar, and I don't even notice, and Charity swoops in and takes care of you, taking on the white mage role, I suppose.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And I don't know if I remember that happening or if I remember watching the video of it happen.
Yeah. Right.
I think I remember it happening. I mean, you were 3 or 4, and you also just got hit in the head, so you not remembering it.
So, I've got an alibi.
Right. But I think I remember, practicing jamming out to Welcome to the Jungle on my wooden guitar. And I think I remember all of that happening and only finding out afterwards that I had smashed you in the head. But I don't know if it's the memory of that or the memory of the video. And sometimes that bothers me, and sometimes it's, well, I've still got the memory in there, and I've still got the guitar.
Yeah. Yeah. Fixed it up.
So one of my big questions is, does it matter? In the sense that, does it matter whether or not I remember the event or I remember the video? Or is it okay that I maybe have some kind of a conglomeration, the two of them? And is it okay that it's fuzzy?
Right.
And I'm not sure. Maybe I'll have an answer by the end of the episode. Maybe I will continue to not.
Yeah, we'll keep talking about that because you're not the only one.
Right.
With a dilemma on your hands.
So the other 2 big questions I want to ask are, 1, or 2, I guess, since I've already asked my first. 2, how do you want to be remembered? So assuming you are done with life, you have passed on, what do you want your legacy to be? How do you want to be remembered? And the third question is it useful to use memory in stories? Or is there a literary virtue to telling stories with memory as a focus? Right. So those are my three questions. Does it matter? How do you want to be remembered? And is there a literary virtue?
Yeah.
So let's talk about memory and Final Fantasy. In Final Fantasy I, I tend to think of prophecy as a kind of memory. It's sort of remembering the future, right? Or there's that line from Field of Dreams where Annie says, maybe you're having flashbacks. And it's like, no, I never did acid. And she's like, maybe you will do acid. Maybe it's a flash forward. I love that movie.
Yeah, it's so good.
But there's memory in that too. His memory of his father and playing baseball and then not playing baseball, and then time travel's a kind of memory too, right? If you go back in time and you can sort of affect what happened in the past, and you affect the memories of present and future.
Right.
So in Final Fantasy I, we've got that 1,000-year time loop going on over and over again, which sort of generates this prophecy, and it becomes a memory of a thing that's happened before and now is therefore prophecy, and the 4 Warriors of Light will show up. Except maybe it's this dude who really hates chaos, and his pals who might be the Warriors of Light. I don't even know anymore, right?
Find out.
But that's kind of the thing, right? Like Final Fantasy I plays with prophecy and time travel, and if you are successful and you defeat chaos at the end of Final Fantasy I, well, then the world forgets the Warriors of Light. So that gets to that question of, does it matter? Does it? Yeah. I mean, we talked when we talked about the first game, we talked about, does free will exist and do their choices matter? But if the world is saved, does it matter whether or not the citizens of the world remember who saved them?
It's a tough one to answer.
In Final Fantasy IV, Kain Highwind is brainwashed and is sort of loses his memory of his friends and allies. And then again, when he is unbrainwashed, he remembers what he's done and feels pretty bad about it. The memory / ghost of Anna pushes Edward to become a hero, which I think is a really fun parallel to the Landingham-Bartlett conversation,
Yeah.
So, for Bartlett, it's his memory of Mrs. Landingham, presumably. But for Edward, it's the ghost of his fiancée, Anna. So in a way, ghosts are a memory.
You're right.
And then, of course, we've got Tella, who can't remember all his best spells. And his drive to recover that memory to defeat Golbez is interesting. So, Cain wants to recover his memory, or when he does recover his memory, wants to make up for what he's done. Tella wants to recover his memory specifically so he can gain revenge, which is interesting.
Yeah.
In Final Fantasy V, Goluf has amnesia upon landing in the other world in his meteor spaceship. He can't remember the world in which he is king, but he does kind of remember Krylie. And his inability to remember is what saves him from the siren using Krylie against him, which is pretty cool. So in that case, memory loss is a shield against painful memories.
That just reminded me, and I would be absolutely remiss if we had an entire conversation about memory and I didn't bring up Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Mm-hmm. But the idea of losing memories or no longer having certain memories as a kind of shield for pain is the theme. The incredibly powerful and heartbreaking or wrenching or heart curing. It breaks and cures your heart all. And that's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah.
I love that movie.
In Final Fantasy VI, Terra is victim to the slave crown, and so it's not so much that she doesn't remember what she's done, so much as she doesn't have any control over herself, and then she suffers this emotional stuntedness throughout, like the first half of that game, as those memories keep encroaching upon her. She's, am I a bad person? What is this? Who am I? And so that I think is a really interesting use of not necessarily memory, but how our minds function.
Yeah.
We also have Shadow's dreams. Dreams are often used in fiction as a way to tell the reader something without the characters necessarily consciously thinking about it. So, but how reliable are dreams as memories? Right. I would say in the real world, probably not very reliable, but in Final Fantasy VI, with Shadow's dreams, I think they're meant to be taken literally, right?
Right. And oftentimes in fiction they are so that's interesting.
Yeah, and I, after our father died, I had some extraordinarily vivid dreams about him, and not about, not memories, but like we were just working on something or we were just talking about something. So yeah, I think, and it, they felt very true in that way because it was absolutely him, in those dreams. But I think it is interesting how fiction often uses dreams to be a literal memory.
Yeah.
When I've never experienced that.
Right. Yeah, I've always thought that was interesting as well.
Cyan has a similar situation in which we, the dream demons are taking him down these memories of his wife and son, and we get to see some literal memories of fishing with his son and admitting he loves his wife, which is great, but also kind of, as we said at the time, a little like, you can just say that, dude. Come on.
Yeah.
We're going to skip Final Fantasy VII for the moment. Final Fantasy VIII, the Guardian forces remove people's memories. And so all these people have forgotten that they're all from the same orphanage, but those experiences still impact their interactions with each other, which is interesting because it suggests that their memories, while gone, are still important.
And that's where you get into subconscious memory and repressed memory and things that are there and still, like you said, kind of informing who you are, but they're just elusive. That's we'll get deeper into that when we get into 8, obviously.
Right, because these people are important to me. I don't have the full context, but I know they're important to me. Like that Cypher son of a bitch.
Right.
And we also have the dreams of Laguna, right? Here are things that literally happened, but are they Squall's dreams and memories, or are they somebody else's?
And those are even like collective, right? So again, we'll get back to that, but people having collectively the same dream.
Right.
Of an actual memory.
Right, yes. And weird-ass time travel.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Time compression.
I love that game.
Nonsense. I love it. Okay, so in Final Fantasy 10, Tidus and Jack are basically the constructs of a memory/dream of a collective consciousness known as the Faith.
Right.
Sure, absolutely.
Skipped over 9 real quick, but, numbers, whatever.
Uh-huh.
Zidane and Kuja both have a memory relapse, not knowing who you are, where you came from, blockage, as it were, actually pretty similar to what we're about to get into. And then, of course, Vivi, that's a little bit different because he's so young and that's, but still there's a, like, we're about to see almost all of these characters, and there are some, further, I'm trying, look, everyone, we're going to have to redo 13 when we get to 13 and stuff, like, that one's not quite as committed to memory as the others.
Yeah.
There you go, right? Haha, we made it out. But what happens, and it's about to happen as we get back into Final Fantasy VII here, right, is this moment, it's like in WandaVision, when you go, where are all the children?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Where does the town end? There's that moment of, wait, how did I get here?
Right.
Do you remember? And we had this because do you remember? Do you remember when we had the conversation about cynicism and plots and criticism and all that stuff, and we talked about the old, there's only 2 plots. The hero comes to town and they either stay or they leave.
Yep. And
the question here is, how'd you get to town?
Right. Oh, nice. Very good.
and almost every single one of our Final Fantasy heroes from here on out, because really for the first 6 games, they're told very linearly. We do get some flashbacks in Final Fantasy VI, but they're all just how it happened and at the time that we need to know. No real funny business going on. No one needs to have an existential crisis because of it. But from here on out, that question of how did you get to town? How did you really truly enter the story becomes a terrifying one for some of our heroes.
Yeah. So in Final Fantasy XIV, man. Okay, so full disclosure, I have played almost to the end of the first scenario of Final Fantasy XIV, and you've played quite a bit further. But just to set up a little bit, Final Fantasy XIV existed and then was destroyed.
Yeah.
And some people remember the destruction and some don't. And I think Cid is involved, but also like every single person who plays, every player character is the hero, right? So they do these events, they delve into these dungeons and they save the day or whatever, but then you can do it multiple times and it's like you'd never done it before. And that's kind of explained by the echo is, how am I doing?
Yeah. Yeah, you're in the right neighborhood. I couldn't explain it better. It's all explained by the echo.
Okay,
That's one of the best.
Which is kind of like back into that realm of also dreams and also ghosts and also time travel and also prophecy are a kind of memory in that they are a way to experience what has come before and what might come again. When really, like we've talked about before, all we really have is right now. And what are you going to do with right now? Well, informed by the past, prepare for the future. And the way we do that is with memory. Kind of.
Yeah, kind of, right.
Final Fantasy Tactics is essentially a history lesson by the descendant of one of our sort of peripheral helper characters. The historian's name is Azraelam.
Yeah, all right.
There it is. And Final Fantasy Tactics Advance 1, at least, is a fairy tale version of that same history, which is interesting because, in Tactics, only the human characters exist, and in Tactics Advance 1, there's all these non-human characters, so which one is the real history? Well, it's probably then the one that happened in Final Fantasy 12, right? Sure.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Right. Or they're all a memory. Or we're all living inside the Matrix digital, right? And then that's kind of the next level.
It's absolutely worth remembering that, history is in fact written by those who survived the conflict, right? The Empire writes the history. And, us librarians try to ferret out the truth as best we can and make it available. How history is remembered and how it is presented is part of memory. In Spirits Within, the ghosts that are invading are essentially the memories of a dead planet asking for help. In Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, the boss monster feeds on memories. In Final Fantasy Type 0, nobody can remember the dead. In World of Final Fantasy, our heroes, Rain and Lon, they can't remember what they did, which is probably for the best at the beginning because they done fucked up bad. It is not good. But that's what helps them, start on their quest to make things right. And I said a few episodes ago, I quoted the Wheel of Time, this time I was raised better. I think that really applies to World of Final Fantasy because this time, they are better people this time. Not that they were bad, but they were pretty freaking careless. And this time, they get it right because they had an opportunity to forget and try again.
Yeah.
And in Chrono Trigger and Kingdom Hearts, I think it's, time travel, modifying history is kind of like modifying memory. Kingdom Hearts has that line, a dream that's like a far-off memory, a memory that's like a far-off dream.
Yeah.
So those are examples in Final Fantasy of memories and how memories and memory-adjacent things are used in plot and narrative. Any other examples you want to draw upon before we talk about Final Fantasy VII?
Yeah, one last one that I'll mention before we get back into Final Fantasy VII is the Pixar film Coco, which deals with the Mexican tradition of how we remember the dead. And I don't want to spoil too much of it, and it's kind of built into the premise of that movie that it's really important to remember those who have passed on. So they have, these altars with the pictures and heirlooms or whatever you might have from family members. And when, the young hero of the movie accidentally finds his way into the land of the dead, one of the things they learn is that you get to kind of live and party in the land of the dead as long as people in the real world remember you. And when the last person alive who ever remembered you passes away, and then nobody in the world remembers you, it's something dark happens. We don't know, and that's kind of this scary thing. But that's you live on, in the afterlife based on that. And of course, the famous, I believe, Oscar-winning song from that is "Remember Me." It's the piece, really beautiful piece of music. But yeah. So the idea that memories are that powerful and that holding on to and remembering those who are no longer here gives them a kind of second life is just another really interesting take on this topic.
So going back to one of my big questions, does it matter? Well, according to Coco, it most definitely does.
It matters very much. Yeah.
All right. So, when last we left our heroes.
Yeah. They were in a memory. They had just been transported to... Or is it? Is it a memory? Is it a dream? Is it an illusion? They know they're in Nibelheim. And they know it's supposed to be 5 years ago, but no one thinks they've time traveled.
Right. We're looking at Nibelheim. It's Cloud and Tifa and whomever the +1 you've chosen is, and you've given the black materia to somebody else to hang on to. And I think we said last episode that we would all choose Barrett because got a good head on his shoulders.
Yeah.
Okay. So, we start out with Cloud. This is an illusion Sephiroth made up. He's trying to confuse us. As long as we know it's an illusion, there is nothing to be afraid of. Which on the one hand feels like pretty solid advice. If you know the bad guy is messing with your head, hang on to the truth and you're going to be fine. But it also has the potential to set you up for anything I say is right, anything he says is wrong.
Right? This is such brilliant writing. I'm going to try not to say that too many times throughout the next. Everything that's happened, this is all brilliant. Everything that happens here is brilliant, even if some of the dialogue back in the day was slightly clunky a little bit. But
right.
This is perfect because he anyone who's seen speculative fiction, if you've been through Kane having his brainwashed or you've watched anything where the bad guy can put you into a fantasy world and mess with your brain, you know the number one rule. Don't believe it. Don't let them do this to you. As long as you believe, and Cloud is going to repeat this over and over again, as long as we recognize that Sephiroth is screwing with us, this isn't real, we're going to be okay. But as we're going to come to find out, that's a kind of security blanket that he's giving himself.
It's also worth noting that we're about to find out how it really happened. Except, and remember, we're in here for spoilers, and we did this with the last time we told the Nibelheim incident. Except, no, we're not. Like, this is how it really happened, except...
Not exactly right. And it's so smart to do that because, again, Final Fantasy's never really done this before, where they've told us a story that turned out not to be true, and now we have to go back and hear it. And so, because of the way this is done, we're going to believe Sephiroth by the end of this. That this is the real truth. And just because of storytelling conventions, because we've seen this before. Once you do get the real truth explained to you by the villain, then that makes them even more dastardly. You know, that they're telling you how it really is, and you hate that, but they're right. But there are elements, again, of this that aren't true. And that messing with the player, messing with the viewer, adds to that same anxiety that Cloud is having here, where when we finally do get to it, he starts to go, wait, again, how did I get to town?
Right. Because here we get that memory of, or we get the story of Sephiroth and a couple of Shinra grunts and a spiky-headed, big sword-wielding dude coming into Nibelheim. But Cloud is not the spiky-headed, big sword-wielding dude. It's somebody else. So how did Cloud get to town? Apparently, he didn't.
Yeah. The you didn't even go to town thing. And wait, who is that?
Yeah. So Cloud is like, this is stupid. And Sephiroth is laughing at him, and they do that thing when Cloud's having memory issues, and there's kind of a fuzz and a blink, and it almost looks like a technical error in the game, but it's Cloud's memories or Sephiroth's illusion, depending on which way we're going here, that's on the fritz.
Right.
So he says it again, this is just an illusion, don't worry about it, and we blink again, and we're to the town on fire. So now Sephiroth has cracked, he's lit Nibelheim on fire, he believes Jenova is his mother, speaking of unreliable narrators.
Right.
And he's had it, he's going to burn the world down. So now we're to that part of the memory. And Cloud says, this is what actually happened 5 years ago. And we pan up to Shinra Manor, and he says, oh, but it's probably not me that's going to come out of Shinra Mansion. He's going to show us another illusion, so this is all bullshit.
This is watch. It's not even you guys watch.
Yeah, watch. It won't even
me.
be me.
It's not even
this
me.
This is exactly what people who are so into a conspiracy theory that any evidence you show them that the conspiracy theory is incorrect just show that you are a Machiavellian liar, or you're part of the conspiracy, or you just don't get it. So any evidence provided, any evidence to the contrary is not actually evidence to the contrary.
Right.
The black-haired man standing in for Cloud's position in this situation talks to Zangan, the monk dude, basically does the same whole thing that happened before, but this guy instead of Cloud. It is worth noting that one of the Shinra grunts is laid out beside Cloud's house. When you're controlling Cloud in the story from before, you can check on that grunt. Dude's still there. Might be important.
Right.
So Cloud says, Sephiroth, I know you're listening. I know what you want to say, but I wasn't in Nibelheim 5 years ago. Sephiroth goes, yeah, you got it. You finally understand.
Well done. You figured it out.
Cloud says, you want to confuse me, but I remember it. I remember all of it. I remember the heat of the fire. I remember the pain in my body and in my heart. Sephiroth says, no, man, you're just a puppet. How can there be any meaning in the memory of such a being? What I have shown you is reality. What you remember is the illusion.
So that... We can get into this deeper in just a second, but that is like the fear.
Yeah.
Right? That is a deep, deep fear, certainly of mine, but that idea that, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, of misremembering so much that, wait, I'm the conspiracy theorist?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
You just said, now, wait a minute. And to be told just flat out and so plainly and so calmly and so coldly. Yeah.
And this is exactly what gaslighting is. Gaslighting is a term that comes from an old short story that got made into maybe a couple different movies. But this dude is trying to convince his wife that she is crazy. So, it's all no, you're remembering wrong. You're crazy. You're hysterical. But one of the things he does is gaslight. It used to be that gas powered all the lights in houses, right? So now it's just mostly stoves. But so there would be a literal flame in the light attached to the wall that was attached to a gas line, and so he would turn down all the gas lights just a bit, and so she would say it's really dark in here, and he would say no, it's not. It's well lit in here. All the gas lights are up.
Yeah.
So this is that no, you're wrong and I'm right. My memory is correct and you're hysterical.
Yeah. And to do it at someone at this vulnerable spot. And then when there's an element of legitimacy
right
to it as well, just that's what makes it that much harder.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we'll get into this question in a minute, but I'm not convinced that Sephiroth is lying here.
Yeah.
So there are some things he's right about and some things he's wrong about, but is he lying?
Right.
So Sephiroth says, I want to take you to your real self. The one who gave me the black materia. Who would have thought a failed experiment would prove so useful? Hojo would die if he knew. And Cloud's like, what does Hojo have to do with any of this? And here comes the explanation.
Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to.
Exactly. 5 years ago, you were constructed by Hojo, piece by piece, right after Nibelheim was burned. A puppet, made up of the vibrant Genova cells, her knowledge, and the power of the Mako. An incomplete Sephiroth clone, not even given a number. That is your reality. And it's not Cloud who immediately denies things, it's Tifa. She says, don't listen to him. Cover your ears, close your eyes. All that talk of Hojo constructing you is a lie. Don't we have our memories together, of being kids together?
Yeah, this is when it starts to get real.
Right.
This is when, and I can vividly actually recall this as a kid, like being with Cloud, being like, yeah, he's messing with us.
Exactly.
Stupid. Like, I get it, but okay, he's screwing with us. Not gonna believe him. We're gonna find our way out of this thing. We're gonna fight our way out like the fantasy heroes that we are. But when Tifa doth protest a bit too much,
yeah,
and because she has avoided this conversation,
yes,
every single time it's come up, including up until now through this part of the memory. And it just starts to get bad for her from here on out. And her reaction is really, it breaks my heart. It gives me anxiety because she's got a million things that she's going through here. And she doesn't know, you're talking about Cloud doesn't know everything, Sephiroth doesn't know everything, Tifa doesn't know everything, certainly, but she knows enough to know that some of what Sephiroth is saying is true.
Right.
Which means, like you said, now I've got to take the side of the super evil bad guy villain in the black cloak over my buddy, over my friend, my hero. And haven't we known each other since we were kids? Now she's questioning her memory. No,
right.
we know each other, though, right?
Right,
You can't have been just created 5 years ago.
And that was the big memory, the promise on the water tower, staring at the stars, right? That was the thing that they agreed on memory-wise.
Right.
So
that we know.
Yeah, so Cloud exists. We know Cloud was not created in a lab by Hojo with Genova cells because Tifa remembers this thing. We've seen the memory, except now we have to question that also.
And because, and I'm about to get to this, she knows that the story that Cloud told in Calm wasn't right.
Yeah.
and that Sephiroth's version of it is much closer to the truth because she's seen this guy with the black spiky hair.
Yes.
Instead of blonde spiky hair before.
So Cloud says, again, we're getting into denial. Why are you so scared? Don't worry about me. I'm all right. No matter how confused, I'm fine. We're all fine. No matter how confused I am, I will never believe a word Sephiroth says. It's true that sometimes I can't figure out who I am. There's a lot of things muddled up in my memories. But I'm the one you grew up with. I am Cloud of Nibelheim. That is the truth.
Oh, man. This is who I am. I'm pretty sure.
Even in his insistence here, he's prevaricating.
It's the first time, he said, hey, maybe some of my memories are messed up. Well, are they now?
Right. Oh, so now you're conceding my point. A moment ago.
Yeah.
All right, so now we get to the kicker. Sephiroth says, do you remember the picture we took before we went to Mount Nibel? Tifa, you remember, right? And just to remind everybody, one of the grunts took a picture of Tifa and Cloud and Sephiroth. So they say, yeah, of course I remember the picture. And Tifa's like, no, don't do it. Sephiroth says, here it is. Do you want to see Cloud? It turned out pretty good. Yeah. So Cloud, still doing the hero thing, right? You don't believe the devil. The devil always lies.
Right.
I should be in that picture, but even if I'm not, no worries. This is just an illusory world Sephiroth made up. And then they show the picture. And it's Tifa and Sephiroth and this other guy who's basically wearing Cloud's clothes and wielding Cloud's sword, but definitely isn't Cloud. Cloud says, no, that picture's a fake. 5 years ago, I came back to Nibelheim. We were going to inspect the reactor. I was 16 years old. The town hadn't changed at all. I saw Mom. I saw everybody in town. I went to Tifa's room. And then he hesitates.
Yeah.
And then he says, I spent the night and we went to the reactor. It was my first mission after becoming first class in soldier. And the screen blinks and kind of fuzzes. He says, soldier, first class, soldier first class. When did I enter soldier? How did I enter soldier? Why can't I remember? That's right. I didn't have to worry about it because I was... He says, Tifa, come on, let's go. I'm fine. And then we kind of blink out of the memory.
So, I remember, the feeling in my body when I was, 11 years old, however it was the first time when they showed that picture.
Yeah.
And he wasn't there.
And it wasn't him. Ooh, yuck.
It really messed with me. And do you remember, I'm sure you remember this, when I was in kindergarten and first grade and I would tell people that I was a ninja in Japan?
Yeah. Yep.
You remember that?
And we would go on adventures and you had a different name and I think I was I was the Simon Belmont character.
Yeah.
And you were the ninja. Yeah. I remember these stories. And you would literally tell people that was the truth.
I would I would insist at school and stuff. To other, real human beings, that at night, instead of sleeping, my brother and I were going on adventures in Japan. I was a ninja and all this stuff. I had a gold belt in ninjutsu.
Right.
I had crafted this elaborate thing out of nowhere. And as a little kid, lots of people do stuff like this, and you grow out of it.
Sure.
And, people have imaginary friends or whatever. Looking back on it feels a little embarrassing, but you're really little, dude.
Right. Well, and a lot of people, that stays pretty nuclear. It stays mostly just, your family knows who your imaginary friends are, not the whole school.
Right.
Whereas you had no shame in explaining to everybody exactly what was going on.
Right. And this was and I don't remember how, I have no recollection of just stopping doing that.
It was really only for a month.
Really?
Well, the way I remember it is it was for a summer, maybe a summer and then the month of school the next semester. But we started playing these games, we played pretend all the time.
Yeah.
And so I remember we crafted this story and then, you just kept saying it and saying it and saying it. And there came a point where I was like, all right, man, let's do a new game.
Yeah.
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 And you hung on to it, and you just would tell people this, and I was like, all right, like, it's not going to stick forever.
Right. And
I was a weird little kid, too.
Right. I mean, it's stuff that happens, but on a different level, we all craft our own narratives about the lives we're living,
Sure.
about what other people think about us. There's a great Ellen DeGeneres bit about how we spend so much time thinking about what other people think of us that we don't realize that they're just thinking about what we're thinking about them.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And, you can get wrapped up in your personal narratives, but just as somebody who did that a lot as a kid, and not just, the ninja thing, that's just the big one that sticks out, but in smaller ways, really would just kind of live in a reality of my own. I honestly think this moment helped me grow up. Seeing Cloud not in that picture was dude, at some point, reality just shows up, and you can't do that. You cannot live entirely in a world of your own creation where you're the super badass hero who was top and first class and you were the best and you did this, and you do flips off of trains and stuff, and Cloud made it into an actual reality.
But one of the things for Cloud is he can do flips off trains.
Right.
He is a badass.
Right.
So that lends credence to this other idea that, these memories that maybe he's concocted or maybe were implanted in him are also real. Why shouldn't they be?
Right. And that comes back to your question of, and this is as old as Plato, does it matter at the end of the day if Cloud's memories are real or if they're just, what Sephiroth is about to tell them that they are? Which is that, in addition to the Genova cells and all the magic-y, hoodicky stuff that's going on there, that it was Tifa's memories. And that explains why she there was a young boy named Cloud, and that's kind of what you're based off of, and that's kind of where your personality comes from, but that's not really who you are. And that's part of the mystery that we have to dive into, moving forward here. But it's even worth asking the question, even if it's true, even if Cloud's only existed for 5 years, like Vivi, but he has 21 years, or I don't even remember the first couple of years of your life, but he's got, an adult's worth of memories, and he has this whole childhood and adolescence. How much of it matters that none of that happened? Well, we're gonna have to piece that all together as we go through.
All right, so let's jump out of the memory hole for a bit, so to speak. That's not how that phrase is used. Let's jump out of the memory for a bit. So Rufus and his pals were on the Highwind, on the airship, headed to the northern crater. So now we cut back to Rufus and Scarlet and Hojo, and they're in this weird cave canyon thing. And Scarlet is amazed because there's the whole thing, this whole place is made of materia. And remember, she was looking for a really big piece of materia, right? Right, the big materia.
Huge materia, yeah.
And Rufus explains that the outside is rich with Mako energy and the inside is this treasure trove of materia. This is truly the promised land, by which he means energy that he can exploit as the president of Shinra Company.
Right.
And Hojo's like, nah, that's all bullshit. There's no such thing as the promised land. It's a legend. Utterly ridiculous. And Rufus says, you're a shitty scientist. So they're having this weird sort of power dynamics things going on. And then that cliffside starts to move and shake, and there's an eye behind the materia that opens and closes. And Hojo says, holy forkin' shirt balls. It's Weapon. Weapon really does exist. I didn't believe in it, but that is a monster created by the planet. It was all in Gast's report. And Rufus says, report? Professor Gast did a report on a weapon? I never saw that report. Where is it? Hojo says, it's all up here. And he taps his forehead. And Rufus says, you keep a lot of things to yourself, Hojo.
My response would have been, I'm going to kill you now.
Right. Because Rufus has no problem taking out anybody who crosses
I was going to say, putting myself in the shoes of Rufus Shinra, I'm not saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You would not. But
no.
Rufus, why is Rufus putting up with this?
Totally. Right. At that point, this was stuff I needed to know, Doc. And this is you have messed up for the last time. But he also does probably need him. And Rufus is a little bit more shrewd than that. So.
Fair enough. So then we blink back to the rest of the party, right? Cloud and Tifa and whomever the +1 is are off in Sephiroth's illusion / Cloud's memory, and everyone else held back, and we gave Barrett the black materia. So we're back with that part of the party, and Tifa appears, and she comes running out from nowhere, and like everybody else gets blinked out of existence, and Barrett like, what is going on? And Tifa says,
Yeah.
Everyone's waiting. Cloud's in trouble. Please come help us. Over there. And so Barrett runs over there. And of course it's not Tifa, right?
Right. And and then stuff gets weird. Wait, has it been weird?
It hasn't been weird so far. Yeah. So it's Sephiroth who made everyone else disappear and convinced Barrett to run that way. Except it's probably not even really Sephiroth anyway because of the clones and stuff. Oh yeah, there are clones. And we go back to the canyon. And Scarlet gets the Star Wars line. She says, Mr. President, I've got a bad feeling about this place. And Rufus is like, yeah, we should go back to the ship now. But then Cloud and Tifa and their +1 are teleported in. And Scarlet says, where did you come from? And Cloud says, I don't know.
Isn't that an amazing, potentially throwaway line? Oh
yeah.
My God, is that the most loaded, where did you come from? I don't know in the history of gaming. Like,
that's brilliant. I don't know how I came to town. Not even in the slightest.
I don't know how I got right here, but I also don't know how I got from there to here. You can't get there from here.
He doesn't know how he got started on this adventure. He doesn't even know how he was born now.
Yeah.
Because Sephiroth just told him that he has no memories, that he has no name, that he is just a puppet, that he was created in a lab, and all these memories come from Tifa's memories, and I don't know where I come from.
Amazing.
Wild.
That's a line I would have skipped over, having played this game so many times. But yeah, Scarlet is literally asking just like, oh, hey, you weren't there a second ago, and now you're there.
Right.
Where did you come from? But where did you come from? And I don't know. Brilliant. I went a while without saying it. That's brilliant.
Pretty darn good. So Cloud says, this is where reunion is going to happen. And I think I said last episode that this feels like the end game. And geographically, we are in the end game. But narratively, we are not.
Yeah.
And he says, this is where reunion is going to happen, where everything begins and ends. And then Barrett shows up. He's run down the canyon. I'm here to help. And you can't stop Cloud from approaching Barrett. Like, you can try, but it's like when you're trying to stop him from attacking Aerith, and everything you do just moves it closer and closer. Once again, as the hand of fate, we are taken out of control.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we trust Cloud as the main character to be our reliable narrator, and we know now he's not.
Yeah. We also, at the very least, hope he can exercise his own free will, but we've seen him now on multiple times not be able to do that either.
So Cloud says to Barrett, we're assuming Barrett, you can give it to any of the other party members, right? But we're assuming Barrett. He says, where's the black materia? And Barrett says, it's safe, I've got it. Cloud says, I'll take it from here. Give me the black materia. And in the background, Tifa is shouting, but she doesn't get a regular text box that's like highlighted, that's easy to read. It's sort of just the text against the background and harder to read.
She's shouting into the void.
Yeah. He can't hear her, or he won't hear her. And Barrett's like, yeah, all right, because we trust Cloud, because he's the main hero.
Yeah.
And Cloud takes the black materia. And then he apologizes.
Yeah.
He apologizes to everybody. Rufus and Hojo and Scarlet are standing there. We're watching. He apologizes to all of us.
Yeah.
But especially to Tifa. Because Tifa, you've been so good to me. I don't know what to say. I never lived up to being Cloud. Maybe you'll meet the real Cloud one day. So Cloud has bought into the fact that he's not Cloud now. All that, this is an illusion, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
No, it's gone. God, man. Well, we talked earlier about, like, you know, why does he trust Kay at Sith? And you said, well, there's no zealot like a convert.
Yeah.
Right? He's never trusted anybody before. And now he's got these friends who have been backing him up every step of the way. Of course he trusts Kay at Sith. because you trust your friends. And Kate says he's a friend. Well, now, no, another turn.
Yeah.
Now nothing is real.
And this, I never lived up to being Cloud.
Yeah.
So heartbreaking, so brutal to hear this idea that he was supposed to be something, and he's, again, the failed experiment thing that's running through his mind now. Mm-hmm. It also echoes something that both Aerith and Sephiroth had said. You remember Aerith on the roller coaster ride, if you go with her, says, I want to meet the real Cloud. And then Sephiroth has this line a while ago. You said, I'm going to take you to meet the real Cloud.
Right.
And now he's saying, I couldn't live up to whatever that was. I don't know what the real Cloud is. And now that I no longer have this image, now that this narrative that I have crafted for myself in my mind is gone, I don't know who that is. And I think on a human level, we've all been there before with something in our lives. When you've lost something that you weren't expecting to, or just, in those tough moments in life, and you go, do I really know who I am? Do I really know what I want? Do I really know what I'm about? And that crisis of self-confidence is captured here in this moment and in this character and in this plot twist and in the themes of Final Fantasy VII about as well as any piece of fiction I can think of. I think it's one of the reasons why it was so popular with a generation of, especially teenagers in 1997.
Sure, yeah.
Of just kind of feeling weird and lost, as it's put by Chuck Palahniuk in Fight Club. We were the middle children of history. There was a weird anxiety and of, like, who am I and does it matter? And it just all comes to a head right here with Cloud, and it's so powerful. And even going back and watching it, it's like, yep, this is why this game, for all the things people want to talk about, its marketing and its graphics, and we've never seen X, Y, and Z. Moments like this, where teenagers who were used to video games mostly being fun entertainment, now, like I said, this moment helped me grow up as a person, really think about who I am and the kind of world I want to live in, the kind of honest relationship I need to have with myself. That's heavy stuff, man.
Well, it only gets harder for Cloud.
Yeah.
Because Hojo is thrilled that his experiment has worked. He created all these Sephiroth clones, and it worked. Like, Cloud is a Sephiroth clone. So he says, where's your tattoo? And Cloud says, well, I don't have a tattoo. I don't have a number. I was a failed experiment. And Hojo's pissed about that. Oh, only a failure made it here. And then Cloud, oh, this breaks me. Cloud says, Hojo, please give me a number.
Oh.
And Hojo dismisses him, like Cloud wasn't the only successful one.
Right.
Like, this is the all data collected in research is good data. It's all numbers you can look at to try to come to some sort of conclusion. Just because it didn't show what you wanted it to show doesn't mean it's bad data.
Yeah.
So Hojo is a second-rate scientist. Rufus was right all along. But even more than that, please give me a number. Give me a tattau.
Let me belong somewhere.
Yeah. And there's a gross historical perspective to look at there. Like, they're really saying something here.
Yeah.
I need to belong so badly. I need to know who I am so badly that I would even let you monster, tattoo a number on me.
Ugh.
And Hojo just shuts him down.
Yeah.
Like, no.
No, not worth it.
So speaking of teenagers in the 90s, not that teenagers in any other era didn't do this, but Cloud levitates into the air and goes away.
Yeah.
Like, he goes to his room.
Totally.
Right? And I get it, right? Like, everything about my existence and my identity has been destroyed. I need to be alone with my thoughts.
Yeah.
And Rufus, like, who the hell was that?
What in the world is even going on?
So we get another moment of, okay, here's the explanation. We've been giving you faulty information all this time. Here's the explanation, except this probably is not. This explains something, but it doesn't necessarily explain Cloud. But we're going to read it now as though it did explain Cloud.
Yeah.
Hojo says That was a Sephiroth clone I created after the real Sephiroth died 5 years ago, out of Jenova cells, Mako, and my own genius. I'm not wild about the failure, but it means the reunion theory is proven true. Even if Jenova's body is dismembered, it will come together again. I've been waiting for the reunion to start. The clones have begun to return. I thought they would all gather in Midgar, where Jenova is stored, but no, Jenova itself moved away from the Shinra building. Which would suggest then that even the smallest cells, because he's injecting cells into these clones, right? Even just the cells are enough to bring Jenova together.
Right.
Like even the smallest cells will return to Jenova.
Yeah.
Who Sephiroth thinks is his mom, but we know is an alien, right?
Right.
Then it cuts to Cloud. It gets this weird perspective. So everybody, the Rufus and his minions and our party members are all down in this canyon, and we're looking down at them, and they're very tiny on the screen. And in the foreground is Cloud. And we said that there were all these weird roots at the top of this canyon, and they were holding on to a giant sphere that's probably materia. So he's sitting on one of those roots, except he's sitting upside down.
Yeah.
From the way gravity would expect. And so we're focused on him, but the conversation is down there. And they all get real text boxes.
What an
like
extraordinary framing, by the way. Like, I'm glad you took the time to describe that, because we haven't talked a whole lot about the visuals throughout this, and there have been some good ones, but that's, I don't know if it's called cinematography in video games, we don't know, but that's, yes, striking visual storytelling to set this conversation up.
Cloud's thoughts are going to sort of interrupt here, and I'll pick out the ones that I think are most salient. But Sojo says, Sephiroth is not content to diffuse his will into the life stream. This is how he's going to persist beyond death. Hojo says he is going to manipulate the clones. I wonder where the clones were going. They're coming here. And Cloud says, yeah, I couldn't figure it out either. You know, it's sort of his thoughts.
Yeah.
Hojo says, the one thing I did know was that Sephiroth was at their final destination. And Cloud says, I wasn't pursuing Sephiroth. I was being summoned by him. All that anger and hatred made it impossible for me to forget him. That and what he gave me. Sephiroth, I'm here, and I brought you the black materia. Where are you? And all the music stops. And Cloud stands up, upside down on the root, and walks to that sort of sphere that we can see trapped in the roots. And we see that Sephiroth is embedded within. Which would suggest, if this is the Sephiroth that died 5 years ago, then all those other Sephiroths we've seen were not actually Sephiroths, but clones of Sephiroth.
Right.
With Jenova cells in them, and the memory of Jenova and Sephiroth, and they're connected somehow. And he's been manipulating them maybe through memory, through thought, through telepathy, through illusion perhaps. Tough to say, but this appears to be the real Sephiroth. And dude's not wearing a shirt. And even in 1997 graphics,
right.
Damn.
No, he's always been a looker.
Long silver hair.
I know. 12-pack abs.
I know, right? Jeez. So Cloud stands up and he walks upside down on this route toward that thing, and he's got the black materia in hand. And Hojo says, this is perfect. Both Jenova's reunion and Sephiroth's will. They won't be diffused into the life stream, but gathered here. And Tifa says, are you out of your mind? Cloud has the black materia. Sephiroth is going to summon Meteor. Every single person on this planet is going to die. And Rufus says, well, I realize that right now might be too little too late, but we got to get out of here. Come with me. There's more I want to know. And then Barrett sees Cloud. And he tries to shout to him, stop, don't do it. And we're treated to this really cool cutscene. We don't see Cloud, we only see his hand holding the black materia. And I thought this was a solid piece of crystalline materia, right? But he pushes his hand through it like it's liquid.
Yeah.
And lets go of it, and it sort of like floats up towards Sephiroth, who hasn't moved this whole time, and it sort of sparks and lightnings, and it's really cool.
Yeah.
And then all of that falls down out of the roots, and a giant geyser of light and water and magic and who knows what erupts into the sky, and this giant Godzilla weapon monster emerges from the northern crater, and it's enormous, and this whole scene is kind of like way overdone, like everyone's reacting a bit too much. It's like you're at an improv where people are maybe just going a little too far.
You know, we've had a long, very thought-provoking, very sober moment, and it's kind of like right after they killed Aerith, they had us snowboard down the mountain, for a little tonal shift. Mm-hmm. And here they've gone from like this really quiet, really creepy, really kind of introspective moment to the biggest bonanza blockbuster, all the explosions, giant monster, people running around screaming. Like, you're waiting for your Gojira moment. Here it is.
Here it is, man. So we're gonna do another cut. We're back to Cloud. The screen is black, except for Cloud's sprite, very, very small in the middle of the screen. Tifa appears on screen. She says, "Cloud." And he gets up and he starts to walk away into the distance. And Tifa runs after him. She says, "I didn't know what to do." She can't catch up to him. And we're back in another memory. We're at the train station, Sector 7 slums. This is the same train station where Elmira found Ilfana and Aerith. We've seen this train station over and over again.
Yeah.
We've seen Elmira's memories here, and now we're seeing one of Tifa's. There is this poor train conductor, dude. He's seen a lot of...
When he said the first time you talked to him, he basically says, "I've seen a lot of shit," and he ain't lying.
My goodness, yeah. There's this guy collapsed on the, sort of sitting up, not unlike Ilfana and Aerith, actually. Just, slumped against the side of the platform here, and the train conductor's trying to check on him. But, he's a train conductor. He's not a medical expert. This isn't his job.
Right.
But, he's trying to look after this dude, but there's nothing for him to do. And then Tifa shows up. She says, "Are you all right?" And the screen keeps, again, it sort of feels like it might have been a glitch in the game, except obviously it's on purpose, because now we know this is the memory being fizzled with.
Off or messed up. Yeah.
So Tifa approaches this person. "Are you all right?" And to us, it's obviously Cloud.
Yeah.
But she doesn't seem to recognize him. And he can't quite articulate, and then he looks at her and he says, "Tifa? Tifa, you're Tifa, right?" And Tifa says, "Oh, Cloud." He says, "That's right. I am Cloud." and Tifa says, "Is that really you? I never thought I'd see you here." He goes, Yeah, it's been a while." Which would suggest that if everything we were just told about Cloud's memories being informed by Tifa is true, if all the... Sephiroth kind of implied earlier that there could be some shifting of shape and shifting of memory and shifting of voices based upon Genova cells.
Right.
So if that's correct, then this is this puppet becoming Cloud based on Tifa's memories.
Right.
"Yeah, that's right. My name is Cloud." "Yeah, it has been a while." She says, "What happened? You don't look too good." And he's like, "Really? I feel fine." And she says, "How long has it been?" He says, 5 years. And she does not respond. And this is her memory, right?
Yeah.
So it's not influenced by Sephiroth.
Right.
And it's not influenced by Cloud. She doesn't respond because she did not see him at Nibelheim. And she says, "It's really been a long time." And then not out loud, we get this sort of parenthetical. "Actually, it's been 7 years. You joined Soldier but quit after the Sephiroth incident, and now you're a mercenary. You told me a lot about what happened after you left Nibelheim, but something was wrong. All the things you didn't know that you should. All the things you did know that you shouldn't. I wanted to make sure, but then I heard you were going far away and I didn't want that, so I thought I needed more time. And that's why I told you about the Avalanche job. I wanted to be with you."
Man.
Yeah.
I'm gonna cry. Like, Tifa is in such an impossible position in all of this. And that she just wants to help this person, and we'll find out again how well did they know each other, what is the history and all of that. But it's, man, that is hard. It's really hard. You had all this stuff off, but I needed to know what happened to you. Something very clearly happened, and I didn't want. And it's, I think, made clear, especially now again as an adult, I understand that this is kind of the justification that they're giving for why hasn't she spoken up before? Why doesn't she set the record straight and calm? Or any number of other times that this stuff has come up. Why hasn't she said, Cloud, your version of events does not match up with my version of events? And I think it comes from this early recollection of, I knew there was something wrong and I didn't know what, and I wanted to figure out, but I knew you weren't okay, and I wanted to try to take care of you through this moment and through everything. And she almost does speak up a number of times too. Like I said, she's in an impossible situation.
Right.
For her to be the one responsible for the break that Cloud is currently having. You know? Oh man, I don't know what you do there, but she's gonna do her best.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember the promise, right?
Yeah.
Like, she said, if I'm ever in trouble, when you're a famous soldier, if I'm ever in trouble, you'll help me out, right? And now here she is. Oh, I know this guy. You think she didn't remember the promise in that moment? Who's in trouble here?
Right. Oh, man. That's so good.
Yeah.
Now she's fulfilling all of his bravado and all of that. And you came back, Tifa, you came back. Oh, so good. This game is good. Do people like this?
Yeah. I think people like
this. Are
this.
there entire Twitter accounts dedicated to Tifa Lockhart? Because and all of these characters.
Yeah, my goodness.
And this is why, right? This is why these characters mean so much to people. Because again, and some of us know exactly what it's like to go through the kind of break that Cloud is going through here. Some of us might identify a little bit more with being very, very close to somebody who's gone through a terrible break. And what is the right or wrong way to provide emotional support and pragmatic everyday support and ninja ass-kicking support and all of the things that Tifa does, and what she stands for thematically as a friend. And we haven't even gotten to her biggest helping hand moment, right?
Right. Oh, man.
She is just extraordinary.
So let's go back to those big questions, Drew. One, does it matter whether or not I remember the event or I remember the recording of the event? And two, how do you want to be remembered? What do you want your legacy to be? And three, is there a literary virtue to telling stories this way? Let's start with that first one. Does it matter? I
think, and this is probably informed by the art that has, I grew up around, and family and friends and all of that, that yes, the argument being made here is that it does matter. Now, your memories may not need to be perfect and all of that, but that knowing the truth ultimately is better than believing something that isn't true, right? Forgetting things is one thing, like we said, misremembering them and then acting on those mismemories, is that a word? It can be very problematic. And, I think ultimately Final Fantasy VII is, like I said, at least that was the moral of the story that I took away as a kid, right? Like I was saying earlier, was you do need to be honest with yourself. You do need to live in the real world and not just, as Cloud was doing for the first 2/3 of Sephiroth's retelling of the Nibelheim incident, building in all of the excuses for why you're the only thing that matters. Your memory is the only thing that matters. Your perspective is the only thing that matters.
So maybe in a way it's okay if my memory of that event is from the video, so long as I'm honest about where the memory comes from, right? And what the memory means to me. I want to pull an example from history. We talked about history being a kind of memory, right? The unsinkable Molly Brown. I was listening to a podcast called What's Her Name, where they talk about, their tagline is Fascinating Women You've Never Heard of. Now, we live in Colorado, so we've heard of Molly Brown. But according to this podcast, she wasn't really called Molly Brown when she was alive. She was Margaret.
Right.
her name was Margaret Brown. And she's, the story is she was found floating down the Mississippi by Mark Twain. Total nonsense. We know that from the musical on her life. And apparently Molly was easier to fit into a song than Margaret, so that's why they called her Molly Brown in the musical. So a lot of our knowledge of Molly Brown, in the cultural zeitgeist, is from either the Titanic film or the musical. But there's all this stuff she did that is not is not part of any of that. Like, part of her story is that she was, looked down upon by society. No, she wasn't. She was well respected by society. Also, like, she did all this stuff to reform juvenile justice, juvenile criminal justice and animal shelters. And she stood up to, we talked about the Ludlow massacre. Right? And that was that Carnegie?
Yeah.
And she stood up to that dude on the side of the Union. And that's not in the musical. That's not in the Titanic. But that is light warrior stuff right there. That is important. Right. And so most of us remember the unsinkable Molly Brown incorrectly, or rather not fully.
Right.
But at least we remember her. So, I mean, I think it's important that her actual, the more complete version of her story get out. But also I think that, so I don't want to say it doesn't matter, right? Like, I phrased that question in such a way as to be a little more provocative. But I don't know. Where does that land on the doesn't matter scale?
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I think it depends. It's nice that her mythology is mostly pretty positive.
Sure, yeah.
I think where you get into trouble again is when we have a mythology about an actual real-world person that... Well, in my line of work, right, I'm a baseball writer, and there's one of the greatest baseball players of all time is a guy named Ty Cobb. And there's been a lot talked about and written about. And, the general consensus when you talk to people about him is he was one of the worst people. He just was a bad person. He was a screaming racist. He was a violent guy. He did all these terrible things. And that's kind of the story, right? That's, again, back to that's the narrative we get. But there have been more books recently and accounts from family and certain things that have come up that are of records of him, like, paying for the medical bills of all of these other baseball players. And it's like, and there's also been a demystification of one of the books that was written about him where a lot of these narratives came from. It's like, actually, that author was kind of on some stuff. So, yeah, I think there is where you really get into trouble. And I would feel terrible if... For most of my life, I've believed that Ty Cobb was a racist, violent prick. And if that's not true, I feel kind of bad about that, right? If this guy lived his life in a mostly upstanding way and was just whatever, and I've got this image of him in my head, I would, I don't think that's good. So that's probably why it's good to try to get at the truth. But to your second question, I guess I'd rather be remembered than not at all.
Right. Yeah. Well, we're going to get, so that second question, what do you want your legacy to be? I don't know.
Yeah.
Man. Like, I guess for the people who know me, or, once I'm dead, for the people who knew me, I would like to think that my legacy would be mostly positive. Especially, I'm a high school librarian. I interact with, there's 1,400 kids at the school where I work. Not all of them come to the library every day, but a lot of them do. I would like to think that I've had a mostly positive impact on most of them. I would like to think that I haven't had a negative impact on any of them, but I don't know that. I know that when I was a kid and a teenager, I occasionally did stuff and said stuff that I absolutely regret. I wasn't, I was no kind of a bully, but I definitely said some stupid stuff thinking I was funny.
Right.
But I'm also not sure that I want to be remembered all that much. Like, there doesn't need to be a biopic about me. God, how embarrassing would that be?
I don't know. It'd be pretty good. I'd watch it.
Yeah, but you're my brother. That's different.
Yeah. Yeah, I might go a little bit of a different direction on this. I do feel like I want to be remembered. not necessarily for anything specifically. No one wants to be remembered negatively, probably, I guess. Maybe there are people that do.
I would hope. I don't know, there's that Barnum guy, all news is good news.
Yeah.
Whenever they're talking about you, it's good.
Sure. I'm not into that. And like and I've got a weird relationship with this too, because I interact with a lot of strangers in my job. And so there's a lot of people that, have their opinions on my work and what I do. And they share them on social media. And we get some of that on this podcast, but it's, again, that's mostly positive. I get more of the other thing.
Can I just say for a moment that it really bothers me when people are mean to my little brother on the internet? Like, you're an adult, you can handle it. Like, this is part of your job, I get it, but it really bothers me.
Yeah. And it's, they don't really know you, and you can only do so much about it. But there is, if people are going to comment on your work or, what you're doing, you'd like for those comments to be positive. And when they're not, that can be frustrating. But I will say, I do get a special, whenever somebody tells us they really enjoy this show, they really enjoy this podcast, and that it's meant something to them. Like, that means a great deal to me. Or those things, when someone does on the baseball stuff and say, hey man, you really helped me become more of a Rockies fan. I never really was before, but I started listening to the show. Like, that's my favorite comment of all. And so, being remembered for that, of like, if there are people who, for example, are listening to this episode long after we're gone, but they've, they're like, oh man, these guys have deepened my appreciation for Final Fantasy, even in some small way. Like, I don't mind being remembered for that at all. That's a dope legacy to leave behind.
That would be a nice legacy. And to link it back to the previous question, maybe another way to think of it is, I would like to be remembered, if I am remembered at all, I would like to be remembered honestly. Does it matter? Maybe not every detail matters. Maybe it's okay if it's fuzzy, but so long as it's honest, so long as it's, as the Ty Cobb story, or even frickin' Andrew Carnegie. Like, dude donated a lot to hospitals and libraries, and I'm a librarian, I should like this dude. Yeah. But then there's the Ludlow massacre. Right. Like, that's not okay either. So being remembered honestly would be nice.
Yeah, I like that.
So before we get to the last question, I want to ask you a related but different question. Right. Drew, what is your earliest memory?
It's funny, I was thinking about that earlier when you were telling the story about dropping the guitar on my head, because I think it's around, if it wasn't that same event, it was something like that. I remember us all being out on the deck and Mom's family being in town, and Granddad, even like before his hair went totally white. Like, I can remember him, like I can close my eyes and remember being on the deck out there and us doing stuff. You and Charity doing the shows. Again, I can't remember if I'm remembering that because of the video or because of whatever, but I can remember being there, if that makes any sense whatsoever. I've got, images in my head scattered from just kind of running around on the deck with a bunch of family.
It's a nice first memory, a bunch of family just being there.
Yeah. That's not too bad, right? Yeah. And then my brother dropped a guitar on my head, and my cousin had to pick me up while I was crying.
I don't remember that part. Like, one of the things I do remember about that event is that I didn't know I had hit you in the head.
Right.
And I felt bad about it, but also, like, it's not my fault, right? Like, I remember trying not to be at fault.
Got in the way. I mean, I did get in the way.
So what is then, or is there any literary virtue to telling stories in this way?
Yeah, I think, as we were talking about, there is plenty of merit to telling a linear, straightforward story, and there are some good ones even in the Final Fantasy universe. But life isn't really lived that way. We remember things wrong. We forget things. We are reminded of things that we thought we had forgotten about. People remember things differently than we do, and it all gets a bit messy. Life is really messy. One of the critiques of Final Fantasy VII, and really of a lot of stuff that Tetsuya Nomura has been involved with throughout his career, is that it's convoluted and complicated and messy, and there's stuff about it that doesn't work. But I think that's something that draws both you and I to it so deeply. It is messy. And it would be so easy to see this game with the spiky-haired kid with a sword that's bigger than his body, and the lab rat dog with the burning fire tail, and all this wild, and the alien from the planet, and memories are all messed up, and not be able to connect to it. For it to all feel so alien. But these people feel real because their lives feel real. And one of the reasons why is because they misremember things. They forget things. They don't immediately correct their mistakes of the past because they're not entirely sure what the mistakes of the past are. And for all of their wild proportions and character designs and everything that Cloud and Tifa in particular for this episode that we're talking about are, they're remarkably human. And so I think when you dive into those types of things, it just allows you to get at the core of who we are in a way that you maybe feel more than you intellectualize the way you can with something that just has a straightforward plot of like a plot twist and then now you're there, right? Fair enough.
So that is memory. It is ephemeral, but it is important. What you remember, how you are remembered by others, and what the virtue of memory and thinking about memory and talking about memory and writing stories about memory might be. But also, there is the world that we live in, and our characters live in a heck of a world.
Yeah.
So, now we need to get back to the now, right? We talked about memory being perhaps learning from the past and preparing for the future, but we've only got the right now. So what have we got right now? Well, Aerith has died, and now Cloud is lost, and Tifa comes to on a medical table. It sort of fades in from this pale, we get the white screen, right, and it slowly fades in palely to the actual scene. And Barrett is sitting there, and he's talking to her, and eventually says, "You'll be better soon. You've been asleep for a long time." And Tifa deflects. We've had a lot of deflection this episode, right?
Yeah.
She says, I'm hungry." And Barrett says, "Hey, why don't you ask about him?" And Tifa, speaking of honesty, she says, "Because I'm scared." Barrett says, "I don't know what happened to him either." And Tifa, looking for some sort of grounding, says, he's still alive, right? "How long was I asleep?" Barrett says, "You've been asleep for about 7 days."
Oh.
So now Barrett's going to give us the lay of the land. He says, "Sephiroth is asleep in the northern crater surrounded by a barrier of light. Weapon, that giant monster that erupted from the northern crater, is on a rampage." Tifa says, "Wait, Weapon is protecting Sephiroth?" Barrett says, "I don't know." He says that a lot in this scene. I don't know. Speaking of a grounded character with the head on his shoulders, right? He's not afraid to say, "I don't know."
Have the answer to that at this time.
So Barrett says, "Weapon is tearing stuff up. Rufus is fighting it. So at least Rufus isn't totally,
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the Carnegie example again.
Yeah.
Not all of it's bad, not all of it's good. Maybe you can't even apply good and bad to it."
Yeah.
And finally Tifa says, "What about Meteor?" She gets up off the table. Barrett gestures her over. There's these metal blinds like we had in, remember Central High School?
Yeah. Being in a doctor's office.
Right, the old part of the building, these giant metal blinds. So we go over there, and Barrett opens the blinds, and the sky is dominated by this giant red meteor. It's Lavos, right?
Yeah.
It's the god of war.
Yeah.
It's the giant moon from that Zelda game. This is the impending doom. This is the sword of Damocles, and it is coming right for your planet. And Tifa says, what do we do? Do we just give up? And Barrett says, I don't know.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and thank you to everyone who has reached out to us. Feel free to let us know what we missed, got wrong, or should have mentioned by following us on Twitter at FFWeeklyPod, or you can send an email to FinalFantasyWeekly@gmail.com. Also, don't forget to find us on Patreon at patreon.com/FFweekly for more episodes and content. Join us next time when we go searching for Cloud in more ways than one, and finally get the whole real story behind the Nibelheim incident. Mostly.